Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. It is now September 2021, and summer is coming to an end, and it's time for opening night of this season of Breaking the Chain. Tonight, we welcome aviation author, public speaker, veteran flight instructor, Mr. Rod Machado, on his presentation of 5 essential lessons learned in 50 years of flying. My name is Jeremy Walters. I'm an ATP, Master CFI, Major in the United States Army Reserve, a veteran of Afghanistan, Iraq, and various other locations in the world. And I'm an aviation content creator who loves to share my passion of aviation safety and inspiring others to do something better with themselves. This is a photo of my days flying the 64, the Apache that is, and out teaching in the float plane out on Lake Buchanan, Texas Center, Amphib PA-12. I couldn't do what I do without the support of my beloved family, Talia, Adam, Riley, Bryden, Charlotte, and baby Jeremy, my youngest. Tonight, we're going to be assisted by, I would call him a veteran follower of Breaking the Chain. In fact, Eric has been to every single Breaking the Chain event since its conception, other than the very first one. And we met when Breaking the Chain was a live event. And tonight he'll be my co-host. He's an instrument-rated private pilot, an aircraft owner, and a software engineer, and he's just an enthusiast of the beloved discipline of flying. We welcome tonight a gentleman who does not require any type of introduction. Rod Machado is known throughout the aviation industry as being a renowned aviation author, public speaker, veteran flight instructor. And one of the things that we talked about before we started this webinar tonight is his capstone for what we're doing is he just loves to participate in promoting aviation safety. As I, Paul, Eric, and all the rest of you all who participate in these webinars. If you don't know Rod, go ahead and check his link out there to his page, and you can read his full bio of how he got started in aviation. So without further ado, I've been yakking my jaws. It's time to pass over the flight controls to our guest speaker, Rod Machado. Rod, you have the flight controls, sir.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you very, very much. And did you want to give me the screen, or is that?
You have it, sir.
I do. Okay, great.
Were you going to share a PowerPoint? I meant to ask you.
No, not at all.
I didn't think so.
Hey, listen, it's a real pleasure being here with you. And by the way, thank you so much for using a picture from me that was probably around 30 years old. That's it. As you get older, you just get wrinkles. And of course, I have many layers of gauze over the camera right now, so you can't see all my wrinkles. No, I don't. But it's just a very good camera for that. But I remember being at the airport one time, and a kid comes up and he sat down next to me. He looked at me and he said, "Ooh, you have wrinkles." And I looked at him and I thought, how do you respond to that? So I looked at him and I said, yeah, I have wrinkles. You know what else I got? I got a car. And I can go anywhere I want with my car. So I guess there are benefits to having wrinkles. Listen, you're Breaking the Chain, or the name Breaking the Chain is a wonderful name for this program that you do. And it's wonderful because you, I, and Eric all know that, as well as many other people in this business, that accidents don't happen in isolation. Typically, they're one event that leads to another, that leads to another. So it's a great, perfect name for this event. However, I do have to my mind just works this way. I wonder how many people are watching from prison right now. And they tuned in because they saw Breaking the Chain. And they thought, I think I could use something like that, an educational program to escape from prison. But I don't know anybody in prison, so I really don't know. Yeah, that's because they all escaped. So that's it. No knowledge in that area, honest. Listen, we're going to have a good time tonight. And I have 5 things I'd like to share with you that are important to me. And as a consequence, I hope they're important to you too. And the emphasis here are on some of the lessons I've learned over 50 years of flying airplanes. And I've been a flight instructor now for going on it's 48 going on 49 years, and it's just such an amazing experience to have been in aviation that long, because if you pay attention even in the slightest way, you start to acquire some interesting insights into how people get hurt and how you avoid getting hurt, and how you have fun in flying, and how some people manage to extract every single bit of pleasure from flying, and some people don't, and make flying a very difficult experience for themselves, eventually leaving aviation and going off into some other occupation or business, such as Wally Thor's School of Truck Driving or something like that, which can be fun, but it's not flying airplanes. So hopefully these things will help you better understand aviation safety and allow you to fly in such a way that you enjoy aviation more. Over the years, I've learned a number of different things, and probably one of the most profound, useful lessons that I've ever learned, and that is that you are not a scheduled airline. Now, I want you to think about that. When I realized many years ago that I don't have to be at a certain place at a certain time in an airplane. I don't have to leave and depart at a certain time. I don't have to complete the flight if I don't want to. I can come back to the airport from which I departed by making a 180-degree turn, or if I can't do 180s because that's not my specialty, I'll do 290s in the same direction and come back and land the airplane. And I don't have to be at a certain place at a certain time in an airplane. I cannot tell you how profound, and I don't want to over exaggerate this and over dramatize it, but it is such an important idea to keep in the back of your noggin, and that is, you are not a scheduled airline. And yet I know so many people that they buy an airplane, and in the process of acquisition, let's say they pay, $200,000, $300,000 for an airplane, or they buy a brand new airplane and they pay $750,000 or $1 million or more for an airplane. It's just, an amazing amount of money. But they buy that airplane, and concomitant with that purchase is the expectation that they will use that airplane. But it's not only an expectation that they have of themselves, it's the expectation of the spousal member who, of course, that was part of his or her money that went into the purchase of that airplane. And now it's almost as if you have an obligation in order to be able to use that airplane in order to make it pay for itself. In other words, to have it produce pleasure, or have it to be productive and to produce utility. And that's a tremendous amount of pressure. Not only that, but when you buy an airplane, or when you're looking for an airplane to purchase, and you talk to a salesman, then that salesman is going to do everything in his or her power to try to get you to buy that airplane. And as you're walking away, you say to the salesman, I think I'm going to take some time and think about it. I don't want to buy right now. And you're walking away, and that salesman has wrapped his arms around your legs, and you're dragging him off the tarmac as you're walking. He won't let go because he's going to do everything in his power to sell you an airplane, all the way to the extent of telling you, let's say this airplane has the capability of flying in, near, and or around convective weather. This airplane can get you up high because it has an onboard oxygen system. Icing, you never have to worry about icing because this airplane has a weeping wing. And that is the typical fare of what you would find for some airplanes that actually have that equipment, and the airplane salesman tells you that. And in so many words or less, perhaps even without saying it, but in many cases actually saying it, the airplane salesman says, hey, listen, this airplane will get you wherever you want to go, anytime, any place. This is the machine for you. Now, Some airplanes can actually do that. There are planes that are so powerful that they'll get you up high, such as a jet aircraft, where you can fly way above the convective activity or the majority of it, or you get up high enough, you can see it and avoid it, or the equipment is such that you can, such as onboard radar equipment and what have you, you can have a very good chance of dealing with convective weather. But for the most part, most people that fly small general aviation airplanes, we don't have that luxury. And here's a statement I want you to think about. If the engineers of the 1950s knew what we were doing with our airplanes today, they would be spinning in their graves. I'm sure of it. I'm absolutely positive of it. And the reason I say that is we use airplanes today in ways that the engineers of the 1950s could not even imagine. And that is flying in convective weather, using NEXRAD to avoid, using NEXRAD tactically rather than strategically. Not a very wise idea. And so consequently, we get this idea that we can go anywhere, anytime. And what that does is predisposes us to two things. Number one, the potential for an accident when our airplane and or our skill level can't quite match the conditions. And number two, the discomfort that it feels to have to know that the next morning you're going to get up and you're going to make a flight that you know deep down inside that perhaps is not the wisest flight to make. But because of that peer pressure, that's what you might feel. It's a very difficult thing for people to deal with, but that idea is a liberating idea. You are not a scheduled airline. Let me add some more on top of that. I can't prove this statistically because I've never actually done the statistical analysis, despite being, good at math. I just never did this. And excuse me. I am fairly decent out of math. I would say that 5 out of 4 people aren't really good at math, but I have some facility with it, and and it's interesting because I would bet money that you're more likely to have a weather-related accident with 2 people on board the airplane rather than 1. That would be my guess. And I say that because I think that with somebody else on board the airplane, you feel a tremendous amount of peer pressure to get to the point where you need to go, and to be able to say to that person that's flying with you, "I'm sorry, we have to turn back." That's a hard thing to do. Think about it this way: which is more difficult to manage in terms of your relationship with another person? Your agreement that you just made with the person, or the disagreement that you have with this person? Think about that carefully. Which is more difficult to manage, the agreements you make or the disagreements you have? Many people say, oh, the disagreements you have, they're more difficult to manage. And I would argue that that's absolutely the opposite of the truth in terms of the way it plays out in real life. Because if you have a disagreement with somebody, you know exactly where the problem is. You know exactly what the problem is, and it's very clear typically what you disagree about. So therefore, you can go into some sort of conflict resolution and solve the problem. But if you agree with somebody to do something and then you decide that you don't want to do it, it's very, very difficult to break that agreement. Such as you're going to take 3 of your friends on a flight, and you're going up to Big Bear because you actually heard that there's a big bear up there, and you want to go see for yourself, despite the fact that you could end up as a rug in some bear's den, but that's your choice. So you go on this flight, and halfway there, all of a sudden the visibility is reduced, or convective weather is present, or a cold front moves in, or whatever, or a fast moving, slow moving cold front, whatever. You decide, I really need to turn back. But because you have people on board the airplane that you made, here it is, wait for it, an agreement with, turning back is very, very difficult to do. Because once you make an agreement with someone, you don't want to say to that person, I don't really want to do this. We need to go back, or we need to land the airplane, or I would rather not go any further. Let's do something other than our original plan. And the reason you don't want to do that is you don't want to disappoint people. And the reason you don't want to disappoint people is because you have a need to maintain your social network, your social structure, I should say. And therefore, you are an agreeable person. You want to please people. And folks, that's why people get married or people agree to get married, like in Southern California, and despite the fact knowing after they extend their courtship a little bit, spend time with each other, that they really are not meant for each other, they get married anyway. And that's why in Southern California, in other words, they can't say, ah, I don't think we should get married. I think we need to call this wedding off. In other words, they made an agreement. They mismanaged the agreement. And had they been unsure or disagreed about getting married in the first place, they might have been able to work out a better arrangement, but at least they knew where they stood. They made an agreement that they didn't want to make, and now they can't break it. And that is what we want to avoid as a pilot. By the way, that's why in Southern California, 3 out of 4 marriages end in divorce. And the other one ends, I think, in murder. So it's a very awkward thing. I remember seeing half a house going down the street on a flatbed truck many years ago. And my first thought was, ooh, divorce is a terrible thing. And then I thought, I wonder what the kids look like. So it could be a nasty thing. So managing agreements, understanding that you are not a scheduled airline, and let that idea just kind of rest and become resident in your psyche. And as a result, that should give you some comfort when you fly an airplane, to at least have some rationale for being able to, in this case, turn back if things go bad. And by the way, one of my friends handles this very, very well. And I think I mentioned this on one of the previous seminars. And that is, when you get in an airplane with a bunch of 3 or 4 people, obviously not a Cessna 150, but you're taking your friends flying and you aren't sure whether the flight can actually, in other words, you think there's going to be an issue, or even if you don't, you look at your friends and you say this, you say, excuse me, is there any reason why anybody here would not be able to handle returning back to the airport should some condition necessitate returning back to the airplane? In other words, canceling our plans, not making it up to Big Bear, where the bear is waiting for us on the end of the threshold there, and we have to come back. Is there anybody that can't handle that? And of course, most people will say, no, I can handle it. We understand. What you've just done by doing that and asking that question is you've made your passengers participant in the decision. And as soon as you make them participant in the decision, they have some responsibility for the decision because they have agreed that they don't mind turning back if they have to. They played a part in the decision. Now, does that make it less likely that they're going to be frustrated if you have to turn back for whatever reason? No, of course not. They'll be frustrated. Okay, so as we say in Mexico, tough taco. That's the way it is. But the uniqueness of that technique is it reduces your discomfort and anxiety at having to say, you got to go back. That's the key. So managing agreements is extremely important, and that is how you manage them. You are not a scheduled airlines. One of the other things I learned that became such an important thing for me over the years is this idea that I need to pay attention to what's happening around me. Now, there are a number of occasions where pilots have been flying airplanes and not been paying attention. And I'll explain what I mean by paying attention shortly. But they've done goofy little things like land gear up. Now that's interesting. That's an example of not paying attention to putting the gear handle down, not retracting the flaps on a go around. Or if you really want to go for the big prize, landing at the wrong airport, not paying attention. And that could be an example or result from distraction, inattention, complacency, any number of these factors that result from our not paying attention. And that's a problem in an airplane because, you set the wrong frequency, you land gear up, and landing gear up is always very, very embarrassing because you land gear up with the FA's, what the FA is going to do to you, right? They're going to make you take a 709 ride. They're going to put you in the airplane, and they're going to, after you land gear up, total humiliation at the airport. And then the chief flight instructor comes out and you do a perp walk around the airport and everybody points at you. It's a terrible thing. So then they march you down to the FA office. They do a perp walk down there, and then they put you in an airplane and they want to see if you're going to land gear up again. That's what the FA does. I've never understood why they do that, given that you've been totally humiliated in the first place. So, can you imagine if you actually landed gear up a second time with an FA inspector on board? You come in and land and just come to a stop there, and the FA inspector goes, "Well, there's your problem." And the guy looks over and says, "Oh, well, what is it?" And the inspector says, "Well, you're just not putting that switch down." "Oh, okay, thank you." And then that would be a lesson learned, I might add. So Aldous Huxley wrote a book many years ago called Island. And in the book, trained minor birds flew around and they said one word, and that one word was wake up. And the purpose of that, the minor birds basically was to get people to pay more attention. Wake up, wake up, wake up. So this, by the way, is also the key to situational awareness in an airplane. How do you pay attention? Well, in a book called The Memory Book, written by Harry Lorraine many years ago, called The Memory Book, it was written that way so you wouldn't have to remember it or have to try too hard to remember it, and by Harry Lorraine. The book, the statement by Harry Lorraine, a master memory expert, he said, "You can never forget something of which you were originally aware." Now, original awareness means that you stop and you actually pay attention, you focus for that brief moment right there, and you say, I'm going to remember that. Or I need to remember this. And perhaps you add a memory hook or something like that, but you pay attention and focus. And folks, paying attention and focusing is an incredibly difficult thing. It's a lot of work, and anybody that reads a book understands and focuses on the book and gets into this idea of deep reading, where you're actually really focused on the text, and it's coming alive in your mind. That's a lot of work, and as a result, that type of concentration is very tiring. But there are times you need to pay attention to what's going on about you. So how do you go about doing that? Well, again, with this idea of learning to pay attention, you need to pay attention when you're in the traffic pattern, as an example, because if you think you are free from the potential for midair collision in the traffic pattern, well, that's like believing that the Bronze Age was a time when everybody had a tanning bed. That's just not true. Or that pre-ignition is the ability to see sparks from the future. That's not true. The idea in the traffic pattern is we rely on air traffic control to call out traffic for us, when in reality, you shouldn't be relying on air traffic control to do that. You really need to pay attention to everything that's going on around you. And I can think of a number of different examples, shooting an ILS approach, for example. Hey, in cruise flight, you don't have to pay as much attention. You still have to pay attention, but not as much. Certainly in the areas that become critical, closer to the ground at slow speeds, such as an ILS approach, getting close to minimums, decision altitude, or for that matter, in the traffic pattern, you have to pay attention. So how do you go about doing that? One of the simplest ways, and one of the ways that we can train ourselves to pay attention, one of the least talked about ways, one of the most effective ways, and one of the ways that people use that they don't talk about much is this. And that is, wait for it, talk to yourself. You would be surprised how many people actually talk to themselves in this attempt to inspire original awareness or situational awareness or attention. And of course, we wear masks now, so we can talk to ourselves all the time, and and nobody's going to know. But I'm talking about the silent talk that goes on inside our brain. And when you look at people that are high skilled, very high skilled people doing jobs that are high risk jobs, and thus the reason for high skill, and even if they don't have as high a skill, they are in a high risk environment. What these people do is they talk to themselves in a way to guide their behavior. And they use their name in order to be able to make that emotional connection with the self-talk that they're doing. Now, you don't have to use your name, but it just helps you pay more attention to what you're saying. And hopefully you're saying the right thing. And here's a good example. If I'm in the traffic pattern, or if I'm on an approach to an airport, and it's a cross country flight, and I see the airport over there, and hopefully it's the airport that I'm going for, and it usually works out that way. So far, so good. And I'm talking to myself, and I'm saying, where am I going? How do I get there? What do I do next? That's what's going on in the back of my brain. Where am I going? How do I get there? What do I do next? And then if I'm making an instrument approach, as an example, I get closer to the ground. That's a very critical area. I have to say to myself, how low, how long, which way? And if I'm doing something that is not going to end up in some sort of landing, or it doesn't have a target for me to reach, I'm asking myself, what are the next two things? These type of self-talk dialogues run in the background. And I do this all the time, not because I was born to do that. I do that because I, excuse me, I should take up smoking. I apparently already have the cough. Apologize for that. Now, don't take up smoking. The Surgeon General once said smoking is 4 times worse than they originally thought, and they originally thought it would kill you. So that very bad stuff. But that self-talk dialogue is what you need to help you pay attention. So where am I going? How do I get there? What do I do next? How low, how long, which way? What are the next two things? These are the kind of things and you can adapt these questions in any way that you want. I prefer to say things like, Rod, where are you going? How do you get there? What do you do next? In other words, I make the question relevant to me as if somebody else is asking that question of me. And I just happen to respond better that way. It becomes such an important way of immediately changing your behavior. And then it becomes a habit if you practice it enough. And I think it was Maxwell Maltz in, let's see, it was a book, Psychoceramics. No, Psychoceramics for Crackpots. No, it was Psycho-Cybernetics. That's what it is. Psycho-Cybernetics. And the book was written probably 50 years ago, but he said something that was so powerful. He said, if you want to make something a habit, you have to practice it for at least 21 days. And by that type of repetition, it becomes an habitual reflex. So that's a very powerful thing to do for yourself. Paying attention and becoming more situationally aware is a very valuable experience like that for you. It'll keep you safe. Again, the number of things that we do sometimes where we don't pay attention and we end up putting ourselves at a great disadvantage is you can't afford that in an airplane at all. The other lesson another type of lesson I learned that was just, exceptionally valuable to me is the lesson of to learn when I'm fooling myself. In other words, when I'm kidding myself. Now, you may think people don't kid themselves, but believe me, they do. People are very good at kidding themselves. If we didn't kid ourselves, we would probably never feel good about engaging in a social situation because we'd be, so worried that we aren't, let's say, we aren't the kind of person that someone would like. But you have to have enough of an ego so that you'll actually extend the boundaries of your normal area of comfort. We're very, very good at kidding ourselves. Another example of this is people think their performance as a general rule is much, much better physical and mental performance than their actual performance. There have been several studies done over the years. One was a Fort Benning study where they took individuals that just, out of their normal ranks and asked them whether they thought their shooting skill was above par. And by the way, let me make it clear, this was done at Fort Benning, but these weren't military people, non-military people. So they may have had some skill with a weapon, but not a lot of practice. And the majority of people, of course, said that they thought they were very, very good shots. And those people tended to not be as good as they thought they were. In other words, we misrepresent our skill to us. And the people that didn't think they were as good a shot tended statistically to be a little bit better shot than they actually were. That's an interesting thing to think about because In the same way that depressed people, as an example, have a more realistic expectation of what goes on around them than people that aren't depressed. Why? Because they see the world more realistically. In other words, so they're not coloring it with the typical emotions we use to get all excited about things. So with that in mind, we have to make sure that we don't lie to ourselves. There's an interesting thing called substitution theory. And substitution theory has it that when you come across something that's complex, such as a complex weather problem or a flight planning problem or something like that, what we tend to do is we tend to simplify it in such a way that we simplify it such that the brain can immediately consume it. And that is a way of fooling ourselves. We substitute a simpler explanation for a more complex explanation that would take longer to derive because it would require a lot of extra thinking. So, in order to do that, what I do in an airplane, at least for me, is I constantly reflect on whether I have the skill to do what I want to do, whether I feel that I'm capable of doing what I want to do, whether I feel, maybe are there extenuating circumstances that would prevent me from doing what I want to do. In other words, I self-reflect to make sure that I'm not fooling myself about a particular activity or an event that I'm engaged in. I'll give you a really good example of that, where we fool ourselves when we rush. It's very easy to get caught up in rushing the pre-flight, rushing the departure to the extent that we forget things. And I've seen this before on a number of different occasions. I've seen people taxi out with a can of oil still on the top of the, actually the back part of the fuselage. Saw that one time. He's taxiing out. He has the oil can back there because somehow or another he was walking around with the oil, put it back there, and he forgot that he left it back there. You see a number of these examples here where people, in this case, rush thinking that they can do the proper job and end up not being able to do the job properly. So and that's why you don't want to rush, even if you are rushing. It's not a good deal. So as the military says, they have a wonderful phrase: slow is smooth, smooth is fast. So the things that we do, if we do them slow, that tends to be smooth. And when you do things smooth, smooth is fast. The next idea that to me was one of the most powerful lessons that I learned in terms of being a competent and, well, feeling like I'm competent in the airplane and feeling comfortable in the airplane is, and this happened when I was, I'd say in my late 20s, something that just absolutely stuck with me. And that is you learn to become pilot in command. And the idea of being pilot in command is one thing in terms of how we log our flight time. It's an entirely different thing in terms of how we act when we are in the aircraft. And I'll give you an example. Many years, again, there's so much pressure to behave in a way that the tower or our passengers expect us to behave. But in reality, sometimes you have to put your foot down and you actually have to say, no, this is the way I'm going to do it. I'm sitting on runway 25 at Long Beach one time. This is runway 25 here. Runway 30 cuts across this way. Runway 30 at Long Beach is a 10,000 foot, insanely long runway. Runway 25 is a shorter runway, but it cuts across, and it cuts across at about the midfield point. A DC-8 took off. It was a UPS DC-8 and very, very heavy aircraft. It took off on runway 30, and as it took off, I'm right over runway 25. It was probably maybe around 100 feet in the air by the time it crossed runway 25. I was holding in position and the tower cleared me for takeoff. Now, at that time, you could clear an aircraft for takeoff in that position. There were 7 airplanes. I think I counted 7 airplanes at the time behind me. And when the tower cleared me for takeoff, I had a choice. My request, what I wanted to say was, I think I'll hold here for 2 minutes, assuming that's okay with you. And because it didn't matter whether that was okay with him or not, because I would have held for 2 minutes or I would have taxied off the runway and got back in the queue. And that was actually an easy decision to make, but I still felt the pressure from the people behind me. Even though they weren't saying anything, they did not know what was going on in the cockpit as far as I was concerned. But I called the tower and I said, Negative tower, we can hold our position or I will taxi off the runway and return to the queue. And the controller said, Roger, taxi off the runway and return to the queue. There was not a way in the world I was going to take off and fly into the wingtip vortices of an aircraft that just departed. You know, folks, sometimes you just have to say no, because the idea of doing something that you know is wrong and yet you don't have the personal sinew to be able to say no is a deadly thing, and it can get you into a lot of trouble. You know, this happens a lot with young flight instructors too. Young flight instructors, typically it's easy as a young flight instructor to be pushed around by your older students, especially if they're professional people. And my dad had a talk with me one time when I was young, and he gave me some advice that I thought was some of the best advice I'd ever received in terms of being able to handle this situation, to be pilot in command, but to do it strategically. And this is what he told me. That's iced tea, by the way. Honest. This is what he told me. He said, never let anybody mistake kindness for weakness. And that's a powerful bit of advice, because sometimes people could take advantage of you if you seem to be a really nice guy. And I said, okay, Dad, but what about this? What about older people? Because I started flight instructing, you know, in 1920. I was very, very young, relatively speaking, compared to what I am now. And so I said to my dad, how do I handle that? My dad said, he said, do it this way. He said, when somebody wants you to do something that you know, excuse me, is not the right thing to do, my apologies, you say, we're not going to do it that way because these are, wait for it, my standards. We're not going to do it that way because these are my standards. Now, think of the word standard. Think about what that means. When you say these are my standards, what you're saying is these are the things that all my training and experience has led me to in terms of the most important things that guide my decision-making ability or my decision-making strategy. When people hear the word standard, even grown men, when they hear the word standard, what they hear is their dad or their mom talking to them, because you don't argue against someone's standards. Oh, you can. It's just not an argument that tends to have any traction, at least if you hold your ground. So when I was young as a flight instructor and I started telling people, you know, acting as pilot in command, that these are my standards, then all of a sudden the arguments disappeared. I didn't have the type of arguments from older people that were my students, despite the fact they obviously had respect for me, but they were much more amenable to seeing it my way. And sometimes in an airplane, you just have to say no. And when you're dealing with air traffic control, sometimes air traffic control might ask you to do things that you don't want to do, and you just have to say negative, the official way in aviation of saying no. And if ATC asks you to do something that you just can't do, you say no. If they insist, then you say, I'm declaring an emergency. And that gives you more power. That gives you as much power as any captain of a Boeing 777-380, Boeing 747. You have the exact same authority because there's only one PIC regulation for all of aviation, and that's Part 91. Decimal 3. So that's the power in that regulation. And that's how, again, being pilot in command, one has to actually accept that authority and use it properly. Another lesson I learned a long time ago that was very powerful is learning to overcome any discomfort or fear that I may have in an airplane. You don't want to fly scared of things, folks. That's absolutely no fun at all. And some people, in over the years, having developed an in-flight emergency program and traveled the country doing in-flight emergency talks, I've had the to me, it's an amazing experience. People coming up and confessing how frightened they are of certain things in an airplane, frightened of stalls, frightened of in-flight fires, frightened of the gear not coming down, frightened of the propeller coming off, propeller overspeed, electrical fires, you name it, those kind of things. And okay, yeah, those things are serious things. Here's what you should know about that. Whatever frightens you, whatever causes you discomfort is something that you can strategically prepare for by developing a plan to handle it. Now, I know that sounds simple. That sounds almost trite, but it is very, very powerful because, for example, people are afraid of losing control in an airplane. They're afraid of panicking. The way you avoid panic is this: you have a plan, you believe the plan, and you practice it enough, according to Maxwell Maltz, or whatever other psychologists you are following these days. Have a plan, believe the plan, and practice the plan enough until it becomes a habit. You have to have a plan. You have to know what to do. And there's something you can do for almost everything in an airplane, folks. Second one is you have to believe the plan. You have to know in your gut that this plan is going to work. So that means you have to have studied the plan to know intellectually that, yeah, that's the right thing to do. And you have to practice the plan enough to believe and to actually have the reflexive skill to implement. So if I see enough smoke, white smoke coming out of the back of my panel, then I know one of two things. Either I have an electrical fire or a new pope has been elected. So if that's the case, then what do I have to do? Well, the plan is, see, again, I have a plan. Turn off the master switch. 99.9% of all electrical fires are handled that way. I have to believe the plan. I know that works because it logically, deductively, it makes sense that it will work. And of course, I carry a fire extinguisher too, just in case there's residual fire from the original fire. And then I've practiced enough to know master switch off. I know what vents to open or close, and I know how to make a high-speed exit from the air just in case that, in other words, a high-speed emergency descent, just in case that emergency is a little bit more extensive than I thought, or the fire may have propagated somewhere else. So I want to get on the ground as soon as I can. Not an emergency landing off field because it's an electrical fire, but typically at another airport. And so have a plan, believe the plan, and practice it enough to make it a habit. Mike Tyson once said that everybody has a plan until they're punched in the nose, and then it goes right out the door. So one has to have that practice, experience, and confidence that the plan will work. And there are very few things that you can't plan for in an airplane, folks. Believe me. I had one person once who asked me this. He said, "How do you know what happens if the way he phrased it was, how do you know you won't get hit by a meteorite on the downwind leg?" I'm not kidding. I've actually had somebody ask me this. And some things, of course, you just don't plan for because they're so unlikely to happen. And I said, well, you really don't know whether you are going to get hit by a meteorite on the downwind leg. I mean, I've never known anybody that actually had that happen. But I will say this, that'll teach you to hold a heading. Because if you can't hold a heading, your chance of getting hit is, of course, much, much less. So I guess there's some good there for people that have trouble, that use the catch and release method of heading hold, if you understand what I'm saying. Catch, release, catch, release. And that's the way that goes. And my final offering here tonight, folks, is this. One of the most important lessons that seemed to have affected me a great deal when I was young, and that was the emphasis that some of the best instructors I've ever had placed on the basics of flight. And by basics, I mean attitude plus power equals performance, that one equation. When I finally understood what that equation meant as a new private pilot, I had a conception of it as a student pilot. You know, I substituted substitution theory, a simple idea for what the more robust, complex idea was. And I finally came to an understanding of attitude plus power equals performance. Now, that's not attitude plus throttle position equals performance. It's attitude plus power equals performance. Because at 10,000 feet in my Cessna 150 with the throttle all the way forward, that's going to be a whole lot less power than at sea level with my throttle all the way forward. And my airplane only has two power settings anyway. And the 150 I fly now, do some training in, and that's fly, no fly, fly, no fly. Not a lot of power there, especially when that fourth cylinder is not working. So attitude plus power equals performance. And if you could have an instructor emphasize this idea of attitude flying, the basic attitudes that we have, the attitude of, in this instance, best angle of climb speed, best rate of climb speed, cruise climb speed, the nose down attitude of best glide, despite the fact that the wings are actually, the cord line of the wings actually level with the horizon when the nose is pointed a little bit below the horizon for best glide. And that's because of the angle of incidence and approach speed. The attitude for approach speed, these 5 basic attitudes. And you understand this concept of attitude plus power, you have a tremendous control over your airplane. So 5 lessons. One, you are not a scheduled airlines. You are a general aviation pilot, not a scheduled airline. You are not TWA, Pan Am. They are no longer with us, of course, but you're not United Airlines, American Airlines. You're not Compass Airlines, although I'm a little concerned about Compass. I think I'm going to fly an airline that actually uses a GPS. That's I think I want an airline with a little more equipment than that. Now, it's a great airline, just kidding. You need to learn when you're fooling yourself. You need to learn when you are not acting as pilot in command, and learn to become pilot in command. Again, I should say you. These are all the things that I had to learn. And finally, attitude flying skills being very valuable for your comfort, continued safe performance in an airplane. You learn to fly attitude, the airplane becomes much, much easier to master. So with that in mind, let me bring back my friends and see if we can have a discussion about what we've talked about so far. Jeremy, Eric, how are you?
All right, Rod, thank you for that insight. It's gotten dark, so I've got to lighten things up a little bit here.
Excellent.
Can you hear me okay?
Just fine.
Okay, so this is Breaking the Chain, and it's really, really to capture shaping aviation safety culture. In the military, we have a, as a commissioned officer, I have a duty to help shape culture within my ranks, my organization. So why don't you share Rod Machado's definition of what aviation safety culture is and how we can impact it?
Yeah, well, the idea of safety culture is an interesting idea, because ultimately the word culture, if you think about what it means, it means the general behaviors associated with a group of people that have sticking power. In fact, we even have a word for the idea of how ideas are transferred from one culture to the next, or from cultural entities within a culture. It's called a cultural meme, M-E-M-E. And that's important for what you're talking about here, aviation safety culture, because these cultural memes, let's just call it the DNA of culture, if I may use this example here, is transferred from the student to the instructor. I'm sorry, from the instructor to the student. Sometimes they're transferred from the student to the instructor when the instructor doesn't establish standards for his or her behavior. So from the instructor to the student, and then when that student becomes an instructor, that student then, or that instructor, transfers them to his student, and so on and on and on. And those cultural memes are that reference why it's so important in aviation to have a philosophy, a code of conduct, some very well-defined ideas about what's important, what you will accept, what you won't accept, part of your safety culture. Once you get that, then you have the potential for staying power. But I want you to keep this in mind. That has to be continually reinforced, though, doesn't it? You can't just assume, okay, we have a safety culture, we have 10 instructors, and now we will perpetuate our safety culture down into our lineage, second, third, and fourth generation of flight students. That doesn't work necessarily unless it is reinforced. Here's an example. About 20 years ago, the FAA stopped, on the commercial exam, the FAA stopped requiring steep spirals as a commercial maneuver. And they no longer they didn't require steep spirals for about a period of 10 years. And then one day, the FAA decided, I think what we'll do is we'll do steep spirals again. Apparently, on a whim, somebody thought it would be a good idea to do steep descending spirals. It was a good maneuver. They never should have gotten rid of it in the first place. The problem was that at the 10-year period, when the FAA said, let's do steep spirals again, came out in the PTS, now the ACS, of course, nobody knew how to do steep spirals. So they had to go back to the book and learn how to do steep spirals and talk to the guys that were in on the original knowledge base of steep spirals. That's how easy and ephemeral this type of safety culture knowledge is. And that's why regular programs like the one you're doing, Jeremy, here is a good example of that. That's why these regular programs are so exceptionally important, because they reinforce that idea. And here's another idea. Many years ago, the FAA, they were making a big deal out of this, and and rightly so. The FAA normally does great work, and sometimes they totally mess everything up. Sorry, but that's what they do. But majority of the time, they do great work. And but then again, just like you, me, and everybody else, we do good work, and occasionally we mess things up. That's just life. Those are the vicissitudes of life. The FAA said, in doing safety seminars, we're not reaching the people that really need to be reached. And I always thought that was a peculiar statement. We're not reaching the people that need to be reached. Well, that's not the intent of the safety seminar. The safety seminar's intent is to reach people that want to learn and enhance their safety potential. And by virtue of those people being at the airport and perhaps at some direct or indirect contact with the people that need to be reached, you have this mimetic exchange, this exchange of cultural memes, and some of that stuff rubs off on other people. And that's a fact. It does. And think about it. Why would it rub off on another person? Well, let's say you're part of a group and you're the outsider. You don't go to safety seminars. You meet two people. Those folks go to safety seminars. You hear them emphasizing the reason for a pre-flight and talking about the value of doing a proper pre-flight and doing the pre-flight backwards, not walking backwards, but doing it the other direction you normally do in order to break out of the rut, to see things differently than you normally see them. And all of a sudden this guy gets that idea. And so he goes out, and when nobody's looking, he does his pre-flight backwards, except he misunderstood it. And he's walking backwards, doing the pre-flight, totally messing everything up. But at least you had some effect on them. Culturally, we do pass knowledge along that way, which explains why over the years, there has been a decrease in the accident rate and the type of accidents that have occurred. It's not as, let's say, as robust as we'd like it to be, but there certainly is a definite trend, and we are definitely affecting people in that way. So that's the world's longest answer to your question, Jeremy. So that's what I think about it anyway. Eric, what about you? Any
Eric,
questions?
you were trying to, you were.
I am. I was Nordo there for a moment. Sorry about that.
About 7,600.
Yep. So kind of following up on that, your idea is that a safety culture is it's not enough to just have a safety culture and say, okay, we're done, check. It constantly has to be worked on. One thing that happens a lot is fighting complacency. So, you've been doing the same thing over and over. And one of the example you just gave was doing your pre-flight in a different order, maybe to see things differently. What are some other thoughts in terms of fighting complacency of, I haven't seen any, I've been doing the safety thing for a while and nothing's ever happened, and you don't realize you're slipping into.
Yeah, no, Eric, it's a great question. It's a very, very good question. Okay, next question. Let's go on to the next question. No,
Here you go.
Here's an answer to your question. I'm sorry. That's why I should never be left alone with that adult supervision. An author named Atul Gawande, A-T-U-L, not Atul, Atul Gawande, wrote a book 20 years ago called Complications. And Atul is a doctor and also a writer. And he wrote about a hernia operations center in San Diego. I always thought this was fascinating. It just sticks in the brain. I'm glad something sticks in there for once. And he said that in this location, the doctors do something like, I think it was, if I recall correctly, one doctor does something like 30 hernia operations a day. Just 30, and it may even be more. And Atul was struck by the idea that and by the way, this doctor these doctors, apparently it's 4 or 5 doctors, been doing this for like almost 10 years, day in, day out, hernia operations over and over and over again. And Atul said, how is it that you just don't get tired of doing the same thing over and over and over again? And one of the doctors said, and to me, the most appropriate, the most interesting insight into how this man thought, he said, when you do something so well that it becomes effortless, he said, then you start to enjoy the mastery of what you do. Now, think about it. Does that apply? In other words, these guys doing these operations here, moving things like that, taking stuff out that needs to be taken out. And if they take the wrong stuff out, they put it back in, and then they sew it up and they do all the appropriate doctoring. Then how does that translate to the airplane? Well, people flying regular routes in an airplane, as an example, over and over and over again, one has to step back outside this the normal parameters of just flying the airplane and think about how much mastery there is in what they do and enjoy it that way. In other words, it's kind of like enjoying a painting. If you don't know anything about a painting, it's hard to enjoy a good painting, right? In other words, maybe your typical artistic fare is cave paintings because you like stick figures and thogs stabbing an antelope with a spear. I mean, that's the high end of your aesthetic capability. But once you go to art school and you learn to understand art, and you graduate because you said the word "dat pretty," and so now they know you have aesthetic sensibilities. Then you look at any painting and you enjoy it more. It's the exact same way in an airplane. Suddenly you start appreciating your ability to fly an airplane, to look carefully at an airplane during the pre-flight, to prepare for a flight. You think about it one level of abstraction, and that gives you pleasure. It's exactly how we get pleasure from so many other things, let's just say in an artistic way. And of course, then you have the basic things where you just do the pre-flight backwards. You break the routine, which again, kind of like breaking the chain, you break the routine here. And as a result, maybe you find some pleasure doing it that way. So I think that is, or maybe you talk to yourself while you're doing the pre-flight too, and point out what it is that you're doing to see if you actually understand why it is or what it is that you're doing, and not just doing it reflexively. So but it's a great question, Eric, and I can't give you a more solid answer for that, but I think the aesthetic answer is probably the most important one, the artistic answer. It's like, I think it was Emerson who once said, too feeble fall nature's impressions upon us to make of us poets. In other words, we have to pay attention to things more carefully to appreciate their aesthetic qualities. And your ability to fly an airplane, that's masterful. You have to appreciate how much skill you have. And I'll end by saying this. I'll end that thought by saying this. I'll walk out to an airplane sometime, and I'll just imagine that I'm a student. I'll put myself in the student mindset, and I won't think beyond just walking out looking at the airplane. And then all of a sudden, I'll let the knowledge that I have reveal itself. Now, I know this sounds strange, but I do a lot of these mind games here just to explore consciousness, because it's a legal way of exploring consciousness. And I will, and all of a sudden, I'll let that knowledge reveal itself. And all of a sudden, I'll look around and I'll think, my gosh, this is how much I know about everything that's here. And it's amazing, except I don't know what those things are. Oh yeah, they're wings. And, but anyway, yeah, you got to have a sense of humor about it. That's my response.
Great.
The second longest response to any question anybody's ever given.
Here's a really good question. What are some of the bad habits being regularly taught by instructors that aren't anywhere in any kind of FAA doctrine or safety doctrine? And what can individuals do to correct these across the community to make GA safer?
Well, where do I start? With all respect to the flight instructor community, and this is not just the result of one instructor, but when you say bad habits, I think one of the terribly bad habit is not learning to look outside. the
I
airplane.
agree.
You have to, and it's so hard with all the fancy entertainment centers we have in airplanes nowadays to learn to look outside. You have to look. You spend 3 seconds inside and 14 seconds outside on a 17-second scan cycle. That's all there is to it. That's what the military does. If you want to have in a complex, high density aviation environment like Los Angeles, for example, you have to be able to look outside. If you don't do that, you're putting other people at risk, to say nothing of putting yourself at risk. Yes, I know TAS, TIS, TCAS, ADSB, FISB, and all that other stuff. Great. That's fantastic. Assuming somebody has the equipment on, it's not being interfered with, or you're paying attention to it. So it's amazing what we cannot pay attention to. So, and besides, I remember the first time I ended up with a terminal avoidance system in my, what was it, P210 many years ago. First time I saw that, I saw all these little dots on the little moving targets on the screen, and I realized, oh my gosh, I had no idea how many people had helicopters, because everybody's got a helicopter. There are thousands of helicopters flying around there that nobody knows anything about. And, sometimes it gets confusing for people to see all those things moving around. So you tend to tune things out over a period of time. One thing you don't tune out, though, is the EYEBALL system, the eyeball system, looking outside. Another habit, not using rudder in an airplane, not having good coordination skills. And but let me precede that by saying, I mean, that's understood. Perhaps the biggest habit is for pilots is not flying a general aviation airplane like a general aviation airplane. In other words, attitude, power, and trim, not using the trim, and not flying it like an airliner. You don't fly airline profiles in a general aviation airplane. You fly general aviation profiles. And that means you stay close enough to the airport, if at all possible, in the traffic pattern, so if the engine quits, you could land on the runway. Sometimes it's not possible because the guy ahead of you is doing a geographic survey, and is mapping the boundaries of the state that you're in with his airplane while simultaneously flying the traffic pattern. So he's way out, going all over the place. Sometimes you just can't do it. Okay, fine, but you try your best to do that. That's another bad habit. And then the other thing that I think would be, you asked me a question that really has so many different answers, and I'll just leave it at that. Those two very important things, I think, well, because there's so many other bad habits that people can get into. I guess I'll leave you with one more for student pilots, and that is not teaching other people how to teach you. One of the best things you can do as a student pilot is to teach other people how to teach you, because who knows best how you learn? Oh yeah, oh wait, you do. And as a result, if you can do that, you end up with a more satisfying learning experience. And sometimes we just count on other people to teach us, and that's a mistake. You don't want to make that mistake if you can avoid it. So that's what I got there. Am I running over my time here? I do apologize for that.
We've got until 9 o'clock if you want to go. I know that you wanted to give about 15 to 20 minutes of Q&A time. Do you have time for one last question?
Oh, of course.
And a closeout?
I love doing this. Are you kidding me?
I know.
About aviation.
We can go all night if you want to.
But I have to eat dinner. Jeremy, in case you don't know this, I have to eat 4 times a day just to be here. So that's just have one of those metabolisms, I guess. But because if I miss one meal, then I'm not sure I'll actually have the energy to be able to get to my next meal, and have to be carried over in a gurney to an In-N-Out burger place. So very embarrassing to have that. Go ahead. What's your name?
I'm going to combine. Sorry. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah. So this is the final question, and this is the question that I ask every single guest presenter on this program. And I'll ask this question and have you give your final remarks, and then I'll close this out for tonight. What is Rod Machado's definition of a professional pilot?
What is Rod Machado's definition of a professional pilot? It's a good question, and it's not one I want to offer a hasty answer to. But if I had to give you a definition, I would a single definition I would say that it's an individual that um, of, follows a code of standards that he has developed or she has developed over a career in flying or during, while engaging in a career in flying. And I'll summarize it and make it simpler in a second. And follows those standards irrespective of the press and the pull and the tugs of the environment and the social situation that makes that person want to abrogate those standards for a more convenient type of response or activity. And by that, simply, I would probably sum it up by saying, it's a very good question. I've never been asked that question before, but I really like the question. And that is, a professional pilot is someone that has developed a code of standards and follows those standards irrespective of the pressures on him or her to not do so. That would be my definition of what's your definition of a professional pilot?
Almost identical. It's a person who has a code of ethics, who will do the right thing when no one is watching and doesn't have to be watched.
Yeah, very nice. That's actually a definition of character too, by the way. Character, when a person does something that nobody doesn't think anybody's watching, there's your character. Eric, what's yours?
I think it is trying to be aware of your ability to make mistakes, and to be constantly curious enough to continue to learn.
Yes. Yeah. And well,
because the whole complacency thing, you read all the accident reports, and it's a, you read it as an outsider, you're like, that person should have known better. Well, that person didn't wake up this morning to decide to go get in an accident. So
no,
what happened?
You're absolutely, that's a brilliant point, because when people, there's a difference between attitudes and values. An attitude is a temporary behavioral disposition. Your values are reflective of your character, and your character or your values are those long-term behavioral dispositions. Those are the standards in a way by which you conduct your life. But you see, attitudes are temporary, and attitudes can have the same effect on us as our standards do or our values do, but in a very temporary way, depending on what the outside conditions might be compelling us to do, but only for a short period of time, typically. So when a person, you said it, when a person gets up in the morning, doesn't plan on getting in an airplane and killing himself that day, but he does. And so why would that be? And the reason is because he's not the same pilot on that day that he was prior to that getting up in the morning or the previous days, or that he would have been had he been able to make it back to the airport by some act of grace. And therefore, he is, for that period of time, he becomes somebody, he's somebody different because something influenced him or changed his attitude. And I experienced this in high school, junior high. There was a girl I wanted to ask to dance when I didn't know anything about dancing, which meant I typically dance better than I dance now. And so I didn't realize it, but she's standing next to her boyfriend. As I walked up to her to ask her to dance, I was inspired because of the Righteous Brothers song that was playing called You've Lost That Loving Feeling. And so I saw her boyfriend, and I should have just turned and walked away, but I didn't. I asked her to dance. I said, Barbara, would you like to dance? And, Righteous Brothers song playing. I had the attitude that I could just get away with this. You lost that loving feeling. And then suddenly I thought they were playing You Have That Broken Nose Feeling because the boyfriend wasn't very happy with me. And I realized what a terrible mistake I had made as I'm holding my nose walking away. So the point is, and that actually did happen. The point is, it was very embarrassing. The point is that sometimes our attitude are swayed by outside conditions, by memories, they're swayed by the environment, they're swayed by some physical response we may be having, and we have to constantly be aware of that. And thus the reason, as I said, learning to pay attention, asking self-reflective questions, and this idea of knowing when I'm fooling myself, that's a good example of that. It's a very, very good question, Eric. I like it. You folks ask great questions. Very, very nice.
You know, you hit the target on the head there. I mean, you said that what I described was a definition of character, but 61-153, one of the requirements to be an ATP is to have good moral character.
Yes.
And so it ties together.
You know, it's fascinating because I once asked on the forum, I said, well, listen, if the ATP requires that you be of good moral character, why in the heck don't we require that for flight instructors? And of course, and of course, everybody moaned and groaned. Oh, no, we don't want that for flight instructors. So listen, I don't want regulation any more than anybody else. But if you're going to make an ATP, good moral character, why aren't you going to make or require people that are teaching future ATPs of good moral character? Nobody's ever been, very few people, I think there are only about 4 or 5 people that have ever been gone down on a bad moral character rap. And a couple of those occasions involve dropping your drawers in an airplane window. You know, so totally dumb acts. But the point is that this is not something that people typically are held accountable for, but it's a good standard to have. And that's the key, because it's there and it's a good standard to have. It's like in well, anyway, that's it's like in Deuteronomy or in the Old Testament. There's a statement that said, if the child misbehaves, I'm not a Talmudic scholar, but I remember reading this many years ago. If a child misbehaves, then the village will stone that child. Well, that's pretty powerful stuff. Well, there was never any case on record of a child being stoned. It's just that it's there. And knowing the rule is there is hopefully enough to make a child pay attention. Kind of like Gary Larson's the greatest cartoon ever written or drawn, where there's a kid in a 2nd-story bedroom and there's this balloon with a scary face on it being allowed to ascend, a helium balloon, right up through the bedroom window. And the parent is inside, one parent is inside the room while the dad is letting the balloon ascend. And the mom says, Billy, you be careful, or you be nice, or I'll summon the floating head of death. And, you know, it's not that there's going to be a floating head of death, but there could be. The potential is there. Anyway, sorry. Listen, I think if we have any audience left, I think we'll call it a night here. But I want to tell you how delightful it is being here with you. Actually, I think the next time if we ever do this again, we should just have a wonderful little 3-way chat here. This is so much fun. And you folks, Jeremy, you're doing a great job, and you have a great a partner there in Eric, and what your contribution is to general aviation is hopefully multiplying itself in the cultural mimetic way that we talked about. And again, I'm very proud of you for what you do. And you know, you invest your time. This is all your time. You do it for free, as we all do. But you know, I'm impressed, and I want to encourage you to keep on doing it, as I know you will.
I would definitely like to have you back, and we'll set you up to come back, because I'm not going anywhere. So this program is going to go indefinitely, and I'm hoping to expand it and grow it and make it bigger. I had to have a nice little summer break, did a lot of things, got a new type rating, and did some school for the Army. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Good for you. Yeah, you're going to have to add an extra wing on your wallet just to be able to keep all those type ratings and licenses and certificates you're getting. So I'm impressed. Well, listen, I'll be leaving now. Thank you very much, audience, for being out there, silent as you are. But I sure did appreciate having you, and the same with you and Jeremy and Eric. And I look forward to the next time.
The consensus from the audience is all thank you.
A whole bunch of thank yous.
Not so silent. Thank you.
Okay,
all right.
Thanks,
I appreciate it, Rod. We'll talk to you in a little bit.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. All right, ladies and gentlemen. I I just wanted to say thank you for your participation tonight. Welcome back to Breaking the Chain. We're moving away from, not really away from, we're going to continue to do these webinars, but we're going to do hybrid. We're going to do the webinars. We're going to have in-person events again pretty soon. I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. And once again, thanks. Send me an email at flyallamerican@gmail.com. I got a couple of emails from folks who were having issues with getting logged into Zoom tonight. And for those of you who will be watching this YouTube clip, I do apologize for whatever reason you couldn't get in. You know, it's cyber. You know, it's technology. Go ahead and follow me on the All American YouTube channel and on Facebook. And then on September the 18th at 10 a.m. here in Temple, we're going to welcome my aviation mentor, one of my aviation mentors, if this thing will, there we go. It's a little bit sluggish. We're going to be welcoming Master CFI, 8-time Master CFI, Wright Brothers, the Wright Brothers Master Pilot Award recipient, and now a plane and pilot columnist, Mr. Ken Whittakin, and he's going to present his presentation called "What Were They Thinking?" And this will be an in-person event here in Temple, Texas. There's the identifier. So you don't have to be in Texas. You can be in where we're at anywhere in the nation and jump in your Mooney or Bonanza and come to Temple on September the 18th. We're going to try to have some burgers, some fellowship, and Ken is going to present. I'm going to try to have the event recorded and released to YouTube at a later date. I don't think it'll be broadcast or simulcast, but we're going to try to record. I'm working on the details for that. So if you're going to come in person, please RSVP at flyallamerican@gmail.com. This has been a wonderful evening. I'd leave you with a final quote from one of my favorite presidents. I have a congenital aversion to failure. That's President Abraham Lincoln. And that is one thing about myself, and one thing that I like to impress upon everybody I interact with is that never give up, never quit, have tenacity. From Eric, Rod, and myself, ladies and gentlemen, have a wonderful night. Fly safe, keep learning, and never give up on a dream. So long.